Things can only get worse. Hardly sounds like a rallying cry for a new government. However, that is the likely message we'll hear from the Prime Minister in a major speech he makes tomorrow. How will voters react? And what of the allegations about cronyism aimed at Labour over the weekend? Across the pond, the much anticipated Democratic National Convention took place. We'll be looking back at what was quite a party in Chicago. Welcome to a Bank Holiday Monday Downtown Den Politics podcast.
Just sort of bigoted women.
Me and my friends sort of used to run through the fields of wheat.
You turn if you want to. The ladies not for turning.
It will cost.
I know words, I have the best words, but there's no better word than stupid.
So yes, as I say, listen, Bank Holiday Monday doesn't get in the way of our political conversation. You won't find Campbell, Stewart or Mateless taken to the airwaves today, I'm sure. But I am joined by my trusty duo of colleagues. That's Joe Phillips, the former advisor to Paddy Ashdown, and Jim Hancock, Downtown's very own political commentator. And we are told, guys, that, listen, the government have been in, 6-7 weeks? I think I'm right in saying Keir Starmer has now surpassed the number of days that Liz Truss was Prime Minister, so he won't be breaking any records as far as unwanted records, as far as that particular tenure in Downing Street is concerned. But Labour seems content to continue to bang the drum about this mess it has inherited. And I just wonder, Joe, how long do you think Labour and the new government will be able to go on with that narrative before people get a little fed up with it?
I think they're probably running out of time. I mean, we'll come on to this in more depth in a minute when we talk about, they are facing an uphill struggle with most of the press against them. And I don't mean, Twitter and all of that nonsense, but the mainstream press. I think, the whole thing about the winter fuel allowance, which most sensible people agree was ridiculous to have as a universal benefit for very wealthy pensioners. But I think the way it has been announced, the way it has been handled, and then it was followed by the Ofgem announcement last week that the cap was going to rise. It has just added to a feeling of, hang on a minute, what's going on? And you can be firm and you can be right and you can say, it's tough and it's not our fault, we've got to fix it. But you've got to give people something to look forward to. And at the moment, they're not doing that. I was listening last night, actually, to Radio 4's Week in Westminster, or Westminster Hour, whatever it's called. And there was a Tory peer on, James Bethell, who was astonishing in saying, no, Labour are doing absolutely the right thing. They're being honest, they're being upfront, they are getting all the really horrible stuff out of the way early on. And this is the right thing to do. And they're being brave and bold. And I was absolutely astonished to hear that from a Tory peer. So I think, the problem is, you've got the Tories who are basically saying, oh, you're just making it up, which of course we know they're not. But Labour have got to come up with their own message, not just keep blaming the other side.
And I think the problem is, Jim, we've touched on this in previous podcasts. These days, if you get a particular perception of a government or a minister or a prime minister, very difficult to shake that off. So if people just look at Labour and think, you're simply making excuses up, there's no difference, you are all the same. As I say, how long do you think they can go on with this negativity and this idea that, look, it's all the other lot's fault and we're just having to carry out these unpopular policies because of them?
Yeah, in terms of the narrative that is set, I imagine your major reference is to what happened to John Major's government when he was elected in 1992. And then there was the immediate crash and Norman Lamont had to take emergency measures. And that sort of defined that government. I mean, there was the wrangling over Maastricht and so on. But from very early on, the Major government was hobnailed by that. There is a danger in this. I think two things. I think they're probably warming us up for a pretty tough budget. It's so that we don't get shocked by it when it comes, you sort of wonder whether they're putting this context on it, and leaving it to fester over the summer. I mean, that's what Joe's saying, really. This thing about the winter fuel allowance and so on, it's festering over a quiet August period. It's getting into people's minds. And then Starmer's doing this sort of undertaker speech tomorrow about the British economy. And you do wonder whether it's all in preparation for Rachel Reeves making some pretty unpopular decisions. The only thing I'd say, I mean, and this is the judgment, is that if you're going to do this, I suppose now is the time to do it. But you know, it's a balance, because set against now is the time to do it because you're at your strongest, because you're most popular, because you've got a sort of buffer of popularity, set against what Frank's drawing our attention to, which is the danger is that immediately Starmer gets characterised as, oh, we let Labour in and they started persecuting the pensions or something like that, and that sort of sticks, and it's difficult to get out of it. It's a very finely balanced thing, but I think they're taking the risk because I think they're going to do a very tough budget.
I think the other problem is that they've not got that wave of popularity that a new government, and enthusiasm that a new government usually does have. And so it's okay to say, well, use the bounce that you've got in that honeymoon period. Well, they haven't really got one, because we know, rightly or wrongly, Labour was largely elected because the Tories were bloody awful. I mean, they were absolutely disastrous. And again, we said this in the run-up to the election, Labour were not really laying out an alternative strategy. It didn't have to, just allowed the other lot to make an absolute horlicks of things. So I take what you're saying, Jim, but that goodwill that governments usually get in the early days doesn't appear to be there. And my sense is that they just need a bit more balance in the conversations that they're having. So, okay, listen, this is going to be a really tough 12 months, but actually what we plan to do, and this sort of throwaway line is, we're going to grow the economy. Well, again, that's not going to cut through with voters. They need something that's more specific, a bit sexier, some lines where people can say, oh, well, I can see why they're making these tough decisions now, because actually in 12 or 18 months' time, they want to do this, this, and this. And it seems to me the missing piece of the jigsaw, Joe. Okay, you've got to be honest with people. You've got to be able to look people in the eye and say, look, we're in a budget hole. We've got this deficit. These are the tough things that we've got to do. But looking forward, these are our plans. And that lack of vision, or the appearance of a lack of vision, I think is really what's getting Labour into trouble.
Yeah, I agree. And I think it comes back to what we talked about last week, which is the whole comms issue. You know, it's all about perception. It's all about communication. If you are going to decide to cut the winter fuel allowance to a number of pensioners, not all pensioners, the timing wasn't great for a variety of reasons, but there are reasons why they had to do it. But of course, you know, the first big thing they've done, apart from lock up rioters and hoodlums and all the rest of it, which is a good thing, the first thing they've done is launch an attack on the most vulnerable, who are going to be filling up the new MP's constituency office and writing and campaigning. So that makes it a pressure within the Labour Party, because you've got all of those MPs who are being buffeted in their constituencies by people saying, oh, you know, Granny can't turn the heating on. And of course, had they done it after a budget where the budget may really hit higher earners, inheritance tax, corporate wealth and all of those things, it wouldn't have been such a hard thing to swallow. But if you cast your mind back to 1997, you know, within days, and I completely agree with you, Frank, that, you know, Labour was elected on a huge wave of goodwill and hope and optimism, which Keir Starmer hasn't been. But, you know, Tony Blair was embroiled in a cash scandal about Bernie Ecclestone and donations. There was also, you know, I remember Harriet Harman having to go on the radio and defend cuts to Social Security as Social Security Minister Secretary, as she was in those days. So, you know, none of this is new and it will pass. but they need to get better at telling their story, because most of us don't know what a mission statement is. We look at it and see it in, an insurance office or a bank, and you think, oh, just do your bloody job, would you? Like, answer the phone. So you need to move away from that mission stuff, and you need to show things, because the other things that are being cut, which aren't getting quite so much coverage, like the sort of supercomputer that is not going to be funded. And in fact, in Scotland, it's a different sort of funding, but they're now using funding that was going to be used through DEFRA for nature conservation and protection. They're now going to use that to pay public sector workers. So, it's happening right across the board, but you've got to say, look, when we've done this, it will be better. And this is how, because at the moment, nobody can see that. And, we're coming into the worst time of year. Kids are going back to school. The weather's getting worse. Nights are drawing in. People are getting fed up, and they'll be putting on the heating soon.
And I do remember the Bernie Ecclestone scandal. I mean, gosh, I think he donated $1 million. And
Yeah, exactly.
The argument was whether or not we were going to have advertising on racing cars, and that was the big scandal, because Labour sort of backtracked up for good reasons, actually. But you will remember, guys, Blair was immediately across the airwaves, looking straight into the camera and saying, "Look, people know I'm a straight sort of guy," and the story it disappeared, didn't it, relatively quickly. And the point we made last week, can you imagine Alistair Campbell? He would have been on the phone 24/7 during that period of time, making sure that the government got its retaliation in first. And that's what I sense isn't happening here. Now, I don't know whether it's because of August and silly season and people are away. I don't know whether it's because it's a new government of inexperienced people bedding in. So you've got this guy, Max Sweeney, who apparently is a really talented campaigner, but has never, I don't think, been in government before. I may be wrong. And then you've got Sue Gray, who's very much about the mechanics of government, not her job to be selling the government's message. So it does come back to this thing that, say, we talked about last week. Who is the guy or the woman who is going to be up front selling Labour's story? That seems to me, Jim, to be a big vacuum within government at this moment in time.
Yeah, well, Pat McFadden is being used for that purpose. Now, Pat is a safe pair of hands, but I don't think even he would say that he was particularly charismatic. And he's not, as you say, encompassing everything, telling a story and putting it out there to the press. So there's an urgent need for somebody to do that job. Just turning back to the sort of the economy and so on, it's going to be interesting. Joe's hinted at this already, how these new Labour MPs, and some of them elected for seats that they never expected to win, are going to deal with the angry letters and texts and emails that they're going to be getting, putting pressure on them not to vote for the cuts in the winter fuel allowance. So they're going to be stuck between the rock of that and the hard place of, we know what happened to the Rebel 7 when they had the temerity to vote against the King's Speech almost as soon as Parliament met.
Yeah, so but don't forget, Jim, they won't vote on this because it's a statutory instrument. It doesn't have to go through the Commons. The only vote that would be is if the opposition or one of the opposition parties tables an amendment opposing it. But in actual fact, it will go through. So there isn't even any chance of rebellion. And there is an argument that I saw in one of the papers over the weekend saying, the government has no mandate to do this. So it's not going to be debated. It's not going to go through the Commons.
And as far as the Labour's problem is that the things that need doing are all longer term, energy, teachers, NHS reform. Then I'm searching in my mind for what the quick wins could be, so people could turn around and say, well, the winter fuel allowance, but, and I'm not immediately seeing. So and there's talking about tough measures. There's talk about ending the embargo on putting up the cost of petrol. That there might be duty increases on that, which is going to make Rachel Reeves quite unpopular. So it could be potentially quite a difficult autumn.
Yeah, well, as I say, my concern is that not that it's a difficult autumn and the government gets off to a rocky start, because that can often happen, but it's whether or not they've got enough goodwill in the bank to go beyond that and win that support and trust of voters back. And to say, perception means an awful lot. And if you start to look like a government that's unpopular in the country, then it gives those potential rebels a little bit more spring in the step as well. It's, oh, well, these guys aren't that popular out there, and they've got, obviously, and we'll come to this in a moment, a press that are only too eager to listen to Labour rebels and give them a platform. So it is going to be difficult for them, and keep coming back to the point. Keir Starmer, somehow, some way, has got to find a route where he can give these tough messages out, absolutely, but also say, look, 18 months, and these are the sort of things that we want to start to do. We're trying to build something here that is longer term, that is a bit more sustainable. You've had all the nonsense of short-termism. I'm not hearing that narrative, Jim, and I don't know whether he's saying that or whether all the spokespeople are saying that, and it's just not being reported. But my sense is they haven't got a route map. They haven't got a communication strategy where you're seeing ministers on the television, on the radio, even on social media, with that messaging that is hammering home some positivity about the new government. And I'm not sure that can go on for too much longer.
What do we think about this black hole narrative that we are really shocked by what we found? I mean, I heard another thing at the weekend, but it wasn't prominently put out, that the Tories spent a third of the annual expenditure in the first 3 months of the year, which apparently is unprecedented. They really did throw everything at it, leaving problems down the road. I just wonder how this plays with people. Do people say, yeah, the Tories have been very naughty and have left you a very difficult situation, or do they say you're whining and get on with it? I don't know.
Well, I think just before the election, Best for Britain did that fantastic bit of research on the amount of money that had been wasted over the last, I can't remember how many years, I think it was 2 or 3 years, it wasn't the whole 14 years, and it was staggering. And they did a breakdown of where the money had been spent, and it's almost as though before the budget, Labour need to come out and they need to go bang, 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 bang. This is the money that was wasted. HS2, now they're going to have to spend God knows how much, because the trains won't reach the platforms and they're building a station at Birmingham that'll never be used. You need to come out and you need to say, this is what we've inherited. You need to really spell it out to people so that they understand. And actually, they need to do messaging within their own party so that every constituency MP can say, here in Biggleswade, that was cancelled because this has been cut, because it's really simple. It's basic comms. What's your message? We've got a hole to fill. This is what has caused the hole. Bang, 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 bang. It wasn't us. Now we're trying to make things better, but make it relevant to people, because they're too oblique in a way of saying, oh yeah, they made a mess. Well, everybody says that about the previous government.
But this is my point. That's exactly it. And so will that wash? Will people be impressed by that and say, oh, that's all right, then I'll take another 5p on a litre on petrol or something? I'm not sure.
Which will then pass on to everything else, because it will knock on to deliveries and therefore the cost of living and food and what have you.
They're communicating in a very technocratic way, which you might say is the style of the leadership in both Keir and Rachel. And as I say, that's what I think that one of the major problems is. I think the other thing that's chickens coming home to roost here is she probably, as Chancellor Rachel Reeves, put herself in a too tight a box, which wasn't necessary. Now, hindsight's a wonderful thing, but I'm sure if you'd have said to Rachel, look, you're going to have a 100-seat majority rather than the landslide that she's got, but you're going to be able to do that by being more flexible in terms of your messaging around tax. And the easiest thing for her to do would have been to say, I'm reversing that national insurance cut that nobody's felt the benefits of yet. And that would be something that, see, for me, my political instincts tell me that U-turn will cause less damage to her than the cut in fuel duty. for example, on petrol,
Yeah.
which is going to cause, well, we've seen what happened when, again, you talk about some of the crises the Blair government went through. Do you remember all the road blockades from the
Yeah.
truckers? So, she put herself in that very tight fiscal box. As I say, I wonder whether she regrets that now. But they do have to find a way
They've
of
got
getting some excitement and energy back into the political narrative.
and feeling that, well, we've voted for you reluctantly perhaps, but we're going down this road. You've got to at least give us an idea of where you're going. Unlike Toad of Toad Hall, aka Boris Johnson, but it'll be lovely, we're going to a party, I know I've got a flat tire and we've got no petrol, but follow me, it'll be marvelous. But you do actually need to have that sense of, no, we're all going in the same direction, which in some ways comes back to what I wrote about in my blog last week, which is, if you want to bring the public with you, you've got to make the public understand that actually some of these things we can change ourselves, whether it's being a bit more sensible about health, or whether it's about not fly tipping. The money that is spent by local authorities on clearing up litter could be spent on vulnerable children. But who drops the litter? And it's almost like they need to sit down in a room without focus groups and just go, hang on a minute, what do we need to say to people? We need to have that conversation where people go, oh, okay, fair enough, I see what you're trying to do. And they're not doing it. And they haven't got a magic, but there are things that Rachel Reeves could do. She could reverse the national insurance. She could actually raise the personal level of income tax and do a huge increase on the sort of 40-50% earners. So you lift everybody up a little bit, and then you help the working poor, who are the people who are worst off because they don't get the benefits, and so therefore they don't get the reductions and things that come with benefits. And at the same time you announce a huge revamp of how you value council tax. I mean, Martin Lewis came out at the weekend and said one of the ways you could alleviate the pensioners fuel thing is that you protect people in certain bands, which I thought was quite interesting. I mean, it's a bit clunky, but there are ways of doing it. You need to look imaginative, but you also need to look as though you're hitting the ones who can afford it, not the ones who can least afford it.
I mean, listen, we're talking about people here very clever, will have hopefully one or two rabbits in the hat, and there's a party conference coming up in September. They will want to announce some big things then, I guess. Unfortunately, we said this, didn't we? Usually everyone just goes to sleep in August, but because the election was right up against the month where we all usually go away, buckets and spades and so on, they've not had that breathing space. So listen, we'll see what Keir Starmer has to say in his speech tomorrow. There may be a bit more balance. We never know, of course, because we've not been privy to the speech. But the other thing I just want to say before we move on to these accusations of cronyism that the Tory press have all of a sudden got excited about. Incredible, really, but there you go. Political instinct. I think Blair had it in buckets. I think Brown struggled with it. I think Cameron had it. I think, sadly, Boris Johnson had it. Keir Starmer decided to cancel his holiday. Do you think that showed good political instinct? Because my opinion of this is, if he'd gone away, put two fingers up to the Daily Mail and the Daily Express, people would have gone, good on you, Keir, because you need a break, mate.
Yeah, I know you wrote that last week, Frank, and it's a very compelling argument, but I think this early on, when you are doing doom and gloom, I mean, had the riots not happened, he would have had a holiday. I think that, that's the big thing to put into the mix. But I think to go away, he maybe had a short window between people being locked up, everything calming down on the streets. He could have gone away for a long weekend or something like that. But then you get the fuel poverty thing, at which point you are going to be damned whatever you do, unless you are pictured, on a wet seaside, well, here in Kent, as it's pouring with rain, or looking miserable in Cromer. You're just going to be damned if you do and damned if you don't. And I just think, I mean, I can understand why he didn't go away, and I think I would probably say he's made the right call. But he's in Berlin tomorrow or later this week. There's an awful lot going on, and you do need some space to think. And I think your point about political instincts. We talked about this before. Do you remember Rishi Sunak?
I do, vaguely.
I mean, who had no...
He's on holiday, by the way.
he's been on holiday since July the 5th, I think. And I think he'll be sending a postcard to us all, which is basically glad I'm not there. But I'm not sure that Keir Starmer has got political instincts. Pat McFadden certainly has. Wes Streeting has. But there isn't an Alan Johnson, there isn't an Alan Milburn, who was a bit of a technocrat but actually could speak to the public. There isn't anybody that stands out that you sort of think, okay, I will listen to that person because I like them, I trust them. They're all a bit, well, as you say, technocratic.
Jim, would you have gone on holiday if you've been the Prime Minister?
Yeah, I think a short break is necessary, and I think fleeing before the Tory press, that sets a bit of a worrying precedent, because they're always going to be trying to picture you lounging on a sunbed when the nation's falling apart. I mean, that's a tired old story that's run every year by the newspapers, and I think you've got to stand up to it. I mean, the fact of the matter is he's had an exhausting election campaign, and he was immediately plunged into forming a government. Then the riots, particularly over this bank holiday weekend, I think he should have taken a break and faced down the criticism. I take what Joe's saying. It has been an eventful summer. August, as we said at the beginning of August, is a dangerous month to write off. But I think he should have taken a break, and I just slightly fear for the motivation for him not doing so, because as we're going to come on to discuss, the Conservative press are going to be on the tail of this government all the time, and to be afraid of the narrative which says, "Oh, you don't care about the country, you've gone on holiday." I think people would not have supported that.
Well, he's made the decision, and he's going to be absolutely shattered. Maybe he'll take the week off when the Tories are in Birmingham late September after the Labour conference, who knows? But he does need to get away and show a bit of confidence in his leadership team, actually. Tony used to leave the keys with
John Prescott.
And we had some wonderful times when John was in charge of the country.
Well, yeah, he get a picture of a frog or something in a jar and said it looked like Peter Mandelson.
Yeah.
So there's always a risk.
So I think that, and when you talk about personalities and characters, the person that keeps polling really well in terms of their communication skills is Angela Rayner. Yeah. And yet she's hardly seen, really, is she, in the national media? So maybe that's something that she needs to be given a bit more exposure to. But listen, we wait and see. What about these cronyism stories then, Joe? Because I think that the Tory press have gone mad for this, haven't they? I mean, you would think that Keir had given all his family a job, and Rachel had all her mates in 11 Downing Street having a big old party on the rate.
Pots and
but there's a couple of stories that have emerged. Let me just tell people who perhaps don't follow these things in great detail. There was a guy who gave Labour over a 5-year period about £20,000 in donations, which I can tell you is a pittance as far as political donations are concerned. But then the more serious story, I think, is this chap who's a lord who was given a pass to Downing Street, which is unusual, and I think Labour have been squirming a bit over that. Joe, tell us a bit more.
Well, I think cronyism, as I say, pots and kettles, and the outraged indignation from the Conservative Party is utterly ridiculous. This is a party that has filled up the House of Lords with its cronies, and most of the people there bought their peerage, and they refused to give back £600,000 to Frank Hester, the racist, misogynist donor. So I think, there's cronies and there's cronies. I think the whole thing about Wahid Ali and a Downing Street pass, there's nothing unusual about people having a parliamentary pass to go into the House of Commons or the House of Lords. Lots of people get them, you know, that you don't have to be an MP, you can be an advisor, you can be a communications consultant or whatever. That's not in itself unusual. It is very unusual for somebody to have a pass to Downing Street. And they've come out, Labour Party have come out with this thing saying, oh, but he was there for the post-election reception. Well, you don't need a pass for that. You just need to be on the list and you will get a visitor's pass, which is valid for the day. So they haven't explained why he was given a pass. You know, Wahid is a very generous donor to the Labour Party, has been for very many years. I think Tony Blair gave him the peerage. I mean, you know, hugely successful in the media industry. But I mean, that just looks dodgy. The other person, the Ian, can't remember his last name, who had been picked to go and work for Rachel Reeves, who's now not going to work for Rachel. £20,000 over 5 years is not very much money, and the idea that, you know, he's a civil servant. I mean, I just find it, I find it so utterly frustrating and so utterly disappointing that the best we can do in this country is go, oh, look what they've done, look what they've, you know, the Daily Mail and the Telegraph are curtain twitching en masse to see, you know, whether they've put something different in their bins. That's the level of intelligent political debate in this country. And it absolutely horrifies me, because we need to move on. And I think, you know, I think you're right, Frank, that you said at the beginning, Labour should have fronted that one out. They need to answer questions about Wahid Ali, but they also need to, you know, where do you draw the line between cronyism and somebody who is an upfront declared donor to a relatively small amount over a period of 5 years? That is not like giving £500,000 and then getting a contract or a peerage.
Jim, as somebody who does have a parliamentary pass.
I thought you were going to say has a peerage. I thought, oh, that's new.
Not yet, but
that's next.
Feel free to put my name forward to the Public Appointments Commission.
What are you making of it, Jim?
Well, the narrative is obvious, isn't it? That Boris Johnson, who is still a secret hero for much of the Tory press, was brought down because of sleaze, and they're absolutely determined to try and do two things. One is get some sort of revenge for the deposition of poor old Boris, who was just having the odd party in Downing Street and didn't know the parties were going on. And if the parties were going on, I wasn't there, or I was there, but I wasn't aware I was at a party and all that. And so there's that. And there's this desire to, in a sense, it's to do exactly what Joe's just said. Oh, you're all the same, you know, to sort of immediately trying to smear the Labour government and level off that feeling in the public, because it was an election where the public were revolted by the Conservatives' sleaze record, apart from other things. And they want to try and immediately say, well, look, Labour's just the same, to try and defuse it and prepare the ground for Kemi Badenoch or whoever's going to be leader of the Conservative Party. So that's the political narrative that's going along. I mean, I think on the particular subjects, I think Ian Caulfield's, I think he's now just going to be doing an advisory role, and it was a fairly minor donation. I think Lord Ali is slightly more problematic, because apparently he also held a garden reception at Number 10. So we're well out of what was appropriate there. So it's you know, it was a mistake. I'm not justifying it, but that's the underlying narrative. Let's be aware that the Conservative press are going to be looking for everything. And it's incumbent on the Labour Party to avoid any perception of corruption. And if it meant that Ian Caulfield, you know, should not have got near government in order to avoid that, then perhaps that should have happened. But that's what's going on here. And until there's a major piece of corruption by the Labour government, they can hopefully bat it away.
Good. Well, listen, I didn't get an invite to that party, so I will be having a word with Lord Ali if I bump into him in Commons. You might have a word, Jim, when you see him down there. But listen, after the break, we're going to be talking about all things American politics. We did mention last week that the Democratic Convention was taking place in Chicago, and it turned out to be a humdinger of an event. We'll review that contest. and see what it means for that presidential election after this short break.
This is the time of year when many of us are just returning from holiday and looking at how we're going to end the year in business with a bang. And with that in mind, Downtown in Business has put together an absolutely fantastic events programme for the remainder of 2024, including 3 awards dinners, the City of Manchester Business Awards, the City of Birmingham Business Awards, and our 22nd annual Liverpool Awards. So something to look forward to, and good luck to all the nominees. Many other events, of course, as well. If you go onto our website, all the W's, downtowninbusiness.com, click on the events section and you will see what we have confirmed so far. But among the highlights, we've got the leader of Manchester City Council, Bev Craig, joining us for a roundtable event. We've got the new Chief Executive of the Greater Manchester Combined Authority, Caroline Simpson, come along for a downtown event. In Liverpool, we've got the leader of the council, Liam Robinson, joining us. We have Steve Rotherham, the Mayor of Liverpool City Region, and Andrew Lewis, Chief Executive of the council as well. Plus a special event with the Liverpool Big Company, a conference on the 5th of September, People, Power, Places. Moving to the south and Birmingham, we're having an event with Naomi Smith, who is the Chief Executive of Best for Britain, who will be reflecting on the general election results and the new government. She'll be joined by Ryan Wayne, who is the Head of Policy at the Tony Blair Institute. And we've also got some great events across other parts of our region in Lancashire and Cheshire, Newcastle and Leeds as well. As I say, go to our website and you'll see all the details there. We look forward to meeting you at those events. And as I say, it's going to be a great end to the year if you're a member of Downtown in Business.
Welcome back to the Downtown Den Politics podcast on this Bank Holiday Monday, where I'm joined by Joe Phillips and Jim Hancock. And listen, if you want positivity, if you want an injection of enthusiasm, you should have watched the Democratic National Convention in Chicago last week, because, wow, was that a show, a political bonanza of amazing speeches, people telling you how absolutely fantastic and wonderful the United States of America is. And I think, an attempt to basically say, if you are Trumpian, then what you are doing actually is talking our country down, and things are not that bad. We've got to all come together. We've got a great future ahead of us. And I think from the Democrats' perspective, given the fact that they've been in power in the White House for, I think I'm right in saying 12 of the last 16 years, a message that they need to get out there, a story that they have to tell. But Joe, we were talking about the lack of communicators, natural communicators within the government at the moment. I was watching that Democratic convention. There were people I've never heard of getting onto the stage and just absolutely holding that massive 22,000 audience in awe. Governors that you'd never heard of, senators that, not household names, that's for sure. But then, of course, the Hollywood blockbuster names of American politics. Obama's come on, the Clintons come on. Hillary Clinton, by the way, I was saying last week I didn't think she'd speak. She made one of the best speeches I've ever heard. She was absolutely incredible. Then, of course, you had Tim Walz, the vice presidential pick. You had Kamala Harris herself. Absolutely incredible. I thought it was a brilliant, brilliant convention. Joe, did you watch much of it at all?
Yeah, and I think, the highlight actually was Michelle Obama. She's so cool, and she's so above it. She's so above. And the thing that came out for me more than anything else is, Yes, they've got optimism. Yes, they've got energy. Yes, they've got enthusiasm. But the cleverest and smartest thing they've done, which all comes back to Tim Walz actually coming up with the word weird, is that they're ridiculing Trump.
Yes.
So they're actually making people think, you want to be with that guy? He's weird. RFK? Yeah, he's weird. He's joining the weirds. So actually, that is a much smarter way to attack. And it's really rattling Trump. I mean, there are still questions, but there is no doubt that she's doing really, really well. They've raised record amounts of money, and the feeling is huge energy. Let's get out there. Let's knock on doors. Let's, one of the things that I thought was really interesting, that they had a sort of a social media section where ordinary journalists, broadcast and newspaper journalists weren't allowed to go in. And these were for content creators. Now, we talk a lot on this podcast about the evils of social media, but it's interesting that the Democrats have embraced that and enabled people to do it, going to that very specific audience, the TikTokers and whatnot. But, there are still questions. There are questions about policy. There are questions about detail, inevitably. And I think an awful lot will come to light when we see. I wouldn't be surprised if Trump doesn't pull out of the debate on September the 10th. And don't forget that actually next week, week after 6th of September, is when the first votes will start being cast in North Carolina because of their peculiar voting system. So, I mean, they're on an absolute roller coaster, and they have got star quality there by the bucket load. And that rubs off, and people want to be part of that, and that's the whole thing. If you want to be part of something, that's why people go to concerts and football matches and everything. We want to be part of it, and to go back to what we were talking about before the break, that's what Labour in this country need to do. They need to make us, the public, feel part of something, which Kamala Harris has done, in shed loads. I thought it was brilliant.
There was an absolute joy around the whole occasion, I felt. And I think that you're right, Joe. They've learned not to take Trump seriously and make him this dark character, but almost make him a figure of fun. It was a marvellous line from Barack Obama around size, his obsession with crowd sizes, which he then obviously, there was a sort of carry-on association with the remark. If you've not seen Barack Obama's speech, I would recommend it. But you're right, Michelle Obama, Hillary Clinton, Kamala Harris, they were the stars of the show. And I thought, as well as the let's take the piss out of Trump narrative, there was also a very clear campaigning element to let's put women front and centre here, because the big issue, other than the economy, that is going to be on that ballot paper in November is a woman's right to choose abortion. I mean, like 1 in 3 women now in the States do not have the right to choose, which is, it's just incredible, isn't it, in 2024 to be making that statement. And I think that, putting women front and centre, and so many of the keynotes throughout the week, was a deliberate strategy as well, because in the States, more women vote than men. And I think there's a big constituency there for them.
Yeah, and I just think, just quickly, because I know Jim's going to come in, but the one thing that Kamala Harris didn't do, she didn't say, and I want to be the first woman president, the first woman of colour. It's a taken. It's a given. Here's Hillary Clinton. She was Secretary of State. Here's Michelle Obama. She was the First Lady. All of those sort of things. That's how you do it. You just make it seem utterly normal instead of making a big deal out of it.
Jim, do you wish you'd have been in Chicago last week?
To some extent, I found the adulation and enthusiasm just a bit too much to take. The BBC coverage, which I recorded during the nights and watched the following day, it was very difficult to hear very often. They were in a tiny little box, and the noise from the convention floor was so loud you could hardly hear the guest that they had on. But let's reflect on what this convention could have been like. I mean, only about 6-7 weeks ago, there was the possibility that the convention would have to be the opportunity of choosing a new candidate, with divisive speeches proposing various people. So the turnaround was absolutely spectacular. I mean, it was a little bit sad, I thought, with Joe Biden that I think they were a bit disrespectful because he on the East Coast of America, he was still speaking at nearly midnight, which I think was a bit disrespectful. They should have organised it so he could make his speech. But of course, as we've said before, he's still a little bit self-serving. He managed to mention Kamala Harris, but a lot of it was justifying his own record. But I think we can forgive him that. You've said all that needs to be said about the speeches. Michelle Obama and Hillary Clinton, absolutely outstanding. And of course, it was the first time Hillary Clinton had been able to address a convention since 2016 when she lost narrowly. And she was generously treated by that because there was a COVID convention last time. And then we come on to Trump, who, you know, even within his own party is appearing at very sort of rather lonely, sort of weird sort of sites outside snack bars and places like that, and making these rambling announcements and trying to find a way of attacking Walz and Harris. I mean, to try and depict Walz as a sort of extremist after Walz's performance is absolutely ridiculous. I don't think the RFK endorsement of him is going to do him any good at all. It's like you say, Frank, it's the weird joining the weird. The one thing that is building up in the press in America is that Kamala Harris has not done a proper sit down to discuss policy yet. And, you know, she has not done well always in the past doing that famous thing about, no, I haven't visited the Mexican border, I haven't visited Europe, is an answer to so that's going to be an issue. I hear what Joe says about Trump pulling out of the debate. I don't think so, Joe. I mean, what a humiliation. Are you Frit, Joe? Will you not debate with me? I mean, he would come in for incredible criticism. Not to take anyway, but go on.
Well, he would, but you know, can he bear the thought? If he could find a way of, I just put this as an idea, but it is doing a little bit of sort of circulation amongst Republicans. If he could not be there, but could somehow or other, step back, not to let Vance go on, because Vance would be an even greater disaster, and I think wouldn't win any votes at all. Whatever happens, Trump's going to be bitter and twisted, and if Kamala Harris wins, then he's going to be bitter and twisted and very, very dangerous. But if he really does seem, as he seems, to be losing his marbles even more, and what is the point? What's the point of having a bulletproof screen if you then come out from behind it? I mean, and in the space, I was listening to him on Saturday night, and in the space of, I'd like to call it a sentence, but it wasn't, because it had no sentence structure. It's just a word salad. But Kamala Harris, she was a fascist, then she was a Marxist, then she was a communist, all in the space of about 20 seconds. And when you look at the words, if you look at the transcript of what he says, it's like children when they start to talk and they speak in their own giggly, goggly, wiggly language. I mean, the man is completely and utterly deranged. And I just wonder whether he would go, I'm not doing this anymore, I can't do this, and have one almighty hissy fit, and then spend the rest of his life, being bitter and twisted because he knows he can't win.
He could always say he's got COVID, and
needs to get disinfected.
That would get some bleach inside you, Donald. I mean, let's go back to that convention quickly. I remember Michelle Obama in the 2016 convention making that wonderful speech, but making the point, when they go low, we go high.
Yeah.
Well, I tell you, she's not took that advice on 8 years later, because she was really kicking them in the ghoulies where it hurts, and rightly so. The Obamas got so much horrible stuff thrown at them by Trump and that sort of wing of the Republican Party. And surprise, surprise, the line, by the way, of the whole convention, I think, was when she said, "Who's going to tell Donald this might be a black job?" referring to the presidency, because Trump had been on a program a few weeks ago talking about immigrants taking black jobs, and obviously he wasn't saying that in anything other than a disparaging manner. But yeah, she was terrific, wasn't she, in terms of her speech? But I think the point I was going to come back to was the thing that you're saying, Joe. He's all over the place. I think Kamala Harris has got in his head in a way that Joe Biden never could have. You know, black female, and she's level pegging with me in the how's this happened? And I think the other thing is he actually went on to a program, did an interview last week where he was saying how much he liked the Obamas. It's just absolutely, he's all over the place, isn't it?
He is completely and utterly deranged. And I think what's really got into his head, apart from the fact that it's a woman and she's black and she's a lot younger than him and she's smart, is this thing about being ridiculed, because he is so vain. Nobody likes being laughed at. I mean, look at our very own dearly beloved Liz Truss, who hadn't got the grace to laugh, got the picture of a lettuce behind her and stormed off. Well, you know, Trump's doing that magnified 1 million times. He doesn't like being laughed at, and it must be niggling him.
And the only thing is, of course, he is better looking than Kamala Harris, as he pointed out in a speech that he made. Again, one of the most bizarre lines I've ever heard from a presidential candidate. Sorry, Jim, I interrupted.
No, I was just saying, Tim Walz, you know, has to be credited with that weird starting off that initiative. Let's take the Mickey out of them, and he's a smart guy as well, and I think will enhance the ticket, and will, you know, be a good team member for. It's not a combination that would have probably been naturally thrown up if the Democratic Party had chosen a candidate. Kamala Harris probably wouldn't have been the candidate. But as you know, as I repeat ad nauseam on this podcast, I've always been a fan of hers. And I think she's blossomed now that Joe is not going to stand. But she's now got a good backup in Tim Walz, and we'll see. But let's wait and see. As we've said before, about 90% of the American electorate are polarized. You know, there's a tremendous amount of support for the Donald Trump, and you know, the clouds of foreboding are gathering if he doesn't win, and all the things that we've said about him and how he can't take it and how he won't accept it, and he'll be sending his puppet electors to Washington with a false result afterwards in November and December. But I mean, maybe I'm overreaching myself, and if she wins decisively, even he won't be able to try that. But you know, we've got a few very interesting months in American politics and things that affect the whole world.
Yeah, I think you're right to flag it, Jim. He's already making some noises, isn't he, about not accepting the result if it doesn't go his way. So what, again, a depressing and incredible conversation that we're having to have. You know, what we see as the greatest democracy on earth, and they're actually right in saying, the Democrats, that democracy is on the ballot paper in November. Absolutely. So we'll see what happens. But it was a tremendous convention. Not much more they could have done, I don't think. But the polls will, I think, show some bounce. You'd probably end up ahead at this moment in time, but a long way to go. And that message they kept hammering home again throughout that week, it's going to be a tight race. It's going to be close. So you've all got to get out there and do your bit to get Kamala over the line. Now, bit of joy, great to watch in terms of political theatre. Take Jim's point, it wouldn't go down in the UK in the same way. We wouldn't put up with that. Our press would be far too cynical, and rightly so to an extent, I suppose. But to watch it as a spectacle, as an outsider looking in, it absolutely fantastic, absolute box office, and I thoroughly enjoyed it. And going back to the earlier conversation about how Labour can try and get some energy and enthusiasm back into politics in the UK, I know there were some Labour staffers who went to Chicago. Hopefully they'll come back with some ideas as to how they can start to generate that sort of energy again in UK politics, because we do need it. You know,
there needs to be a celebration in Liverpool of this great victory. I mean, it'll be a shame if we go into the conference in Liverpool with foreboding about the economy without actually celebrating the great Labour victory, and they need to do it without being triumphalist. I mean, you're absolutely right. We don't have quite the same appetite for things, and it has to be handled well. Otherwise, it seems triumphalist or trivial and that sort of thing. I mean, it's just a different philosophy. The Americans really enjoy their politics, and it's a different thing. But I think there should be some lighter moments in Liverpool for the Labour conference.
Yeah, you would hope so. And I think that the other thing that they ought to be taking note of is all your great speakers are not necessarily going to be in the cabinet. So
Exactly.
Can you unearth some gems, whether it be across the country or new backbenchers that they know are good performers, and get them up there and start to vary the sort of faces and the accents and the type of people that the audience are watching, because that was the most fascinating thing to me. Okay, describe them as the Hollywood set of politics. They were always going to get the headlines, and of course, most of the memes and the social media clips and the stuff on the news was about them. But I saw some fabulous speakers who'd never heard of before. They'll be around in the Labour Party. It's just a case of finding them, get them up on the stage, and a little bit more razzmatazz from Labour over the next month or so. That's what I'm hoping for anyway. We'll see. Listen, that's it from us on this Bank Holiday Monday. It's not for me to talk about football, but Jim and his 9-player Plymouth Argyle got another wonderful point at the weekend. Joe's West Ham won. The only bit of optimism as an Evertonian I had last week, and thanks to Tom Higgins and his team at Lango Raw, I got a stadium show round, Jim, the new place.
Ooh.
And it is absolutely spectacular. I mean, people will have seen the photographs of Bramley Moor Dock, Everton's new stadium, that is currently being built, virtually finished now. But I tell you, in real life, as they say, it is even better.
Ready to receive the Green Army next season.
Very possibly with Wayne Rooney's return, but will he be your manager or ours? We will wait and see.
Well, I hope it's got more atmosphere, Frank, than the Olympic Stadium has for West Ham, because I mourn the day we left Upton Park.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So do I.
On a serious note, in terms of learning lessons, Everton definitely have, because it's a bowl, and you can imagine how the noise is going to reverberate around that place. They've done a great job, and as I say, hats off to Lango Raw for finishing the job, not just on time, but within budget as well. Not
Anybody
many
else done to do HS2?
Well, I think Lango Raw were ready to go on the northern leg, but there you go, that job didn't quite happen. Anyway, enough of football, enough of this nonsense. We'll be back with some more politics next week. Have a great bank holiday, have a good 7 days, and we'll see you all soon.
If you've enjoyed listening to this podcast, then you will love our TFI Friday bulletin. That's Thank Frank It's Friday. The bulletin includes blogs from Jim Hancock, Joe Phillips and myself, plus some words from our man in America, Martin Littrop. There's also HR advice and updates from Victoria Brown, and our hospitality hero, Stephen Heskett, talks all things visitor economy. You can subscribe to our bulletin for free. Just visit downtownandbusiness.com, go to the subscription page and register your interest there. It's free, it's TFI, and it's well worth a read.